Hi, Van. Thanks for coming onto the show.
Thanks for inviting me on.
So, Van, you are a big thinker, and we, been discussing various things back and forth for a little while now. And obviously, at HMO Roadmap, we've got a good partnership with COHO, and you're one of the founders of COHO.
Mhm.
But I was really interested to bring you on. It's slightly different to a lot of the guests we bring on the show, but what you're doing at COHO, and I think some of the visions that you've got for our industry, I find really, really quite interesting. So I'm super excited to get you on and talk about that. So to kick us off, Van, could you tell us a bit about who you are, COHO, and I guess the kind of the big mission that you guys have got?
Yeah, sure. So when you say that I'm not like people that's been on, you probably mean I don't have much property knowledge. Hopefully, that's not actually true. But yeah,
Slightly different.
different
Yeah,
knowledge.
yeah. We're not here to talk about a case study or that
Yeah, yeah.
stuff, but I absolutely know you know a lot about HMO. So.
So my background is I founded two tech startups in the past and was fortunate enough to exit them quite nicely. One to a big top 100 fintech, one to a sort of a Israeli marketing company. And where my strength is kind of looking at things that can be improved and kind of coming in without the bias of actually understanding everything so deeply, and instead looking at it kind of more from a kind of macro level and finding system improvements kind of. So my last business was in the betting industry. I don't bet. So yeah, we built the biggest kind of marketplace there and exited it in sports handicapping. And what I'm really interested in is HMOs and shared living. And that kind of where HMOs is right now, that may sound like not massively interesting, but I really feel like there is opportunity for the whole world to change how people see living, and to go more into that. So basically, I think like I've got four kids now, and I think in sort of 10 years, 20 years time when they're leaving home, they're probably going to move into a small one bed flat. And that's not the model I think we should be going towards. I'd really like to see shared living as like a primary living option for younger people, for older people, for divorcees. So Coho is on a mission to try to make that a reality, to change how people choose to live. In a
I
nutshell.
mean, you're definitely in the right place, Van, because actually this is not a boring topic to me and our listeners at all. And I'm so aligned with this. It's quite interesting. I've had some conversations recently with a number of people and some publications about the the rising interest in living in shared
Mhm.
accommodation. I think part of the narrative there has been, is this becoming more mainstream because it's a necessity, or is it because it's a choice? And I actually think there's a combination of both going on, but it does really excite me. It definitely excites me from a business perspective
Yeah.
because this is an arena we can grow into. But I think the idea that shared living, and not just to young people, which I think is largely how we kind of think about it at the
Yeah.
minute, um, has the huge potential to grow. And you mentioned then divorcees, older generations, and I think that's a really exciting concept. Are you a landlord, Van? Do you or is this something that was nurtured through living in shared homes yourself?
Yeah, so this came from when I was at university. I didn't have the student life. I didn't like live on campus and have all of that kind of like wildness. I'd often stay at friends and it'd be like, this is fun. I've probably missed out a bit here. um, but then after university, I was living with my parents, get on well with them, so it's not like a problem. But it's just like being kind of like early 20s, living with your parents, working, and then you basically just come back. Occasionally, you go on a night out. It felt like I was missing out, and it's like this can't be kind of it for my early 20s. So I actively sought that kind of TV style shared living experience that may or may not exist because it's scripted, but does it exist? And then I was like really fortunate, and I found this community in Birmingham with I don't know, I think it was about 15 houses. I kind of changed the number because there always ones popped up and it's like some got involved, some didn't. But a load of houses, and basically the landlords, I emailed and I was like, I'm interested in this room. And he was like, okay, here's the email address of the tenants. These ones are also available. Why don't you just go over one of the nights, pop around a few of the houses and see which one you want to live in? So I arranged a time with each of them, and it was literally like a relaxed interview. Like I just came in, I didn't even look at the room. It was like, here's the living room, cup of tea, and we're just talking. And like, I was judging it on like, do I want to live with these people? Not, do I want to live in this location, in this bedroom? What's the bathroom like? What's the bed like? It was really like, these are the people I'm going to be living with. And it was amazing when I moved in. Like I could have chosen like 4 properties that I would have been absolutely happy living in any of them. None of them were that nice. You know, you wouldn't consider them luxury, and people would come over and be like, huh, it's not the tidiest place. But it wasn't messy either. It just wasn't this like Instagram style property. It's just basically not too different than what my house is now. But yeah, we did amazing things. It was like house parties, not crazy ones because we were all professionals at that point, but house parties, poker nights. We had a dodgeball team that we got to the 13th in the UK.
Wow, okay.
Like all of these different things that like literally could be a TV series that probably no one would watch, but I'd watch it.
I would definitely watch it.
But like at the time, like I had my friends in the area, and they'd come over for like to watch movies with me and my housemates, for house parties, to play games, and like they'd see the experience I had, and they'd be like, "Huh, this looks quite good." But then the reality was, like, most people didn't have that experience. Most people moved into what we all probably recognize as the standard HMO.
Yeah, I think I know exactly what you mean. And actually, I think there's a really interesting topic of conversation here, which is we talk a lot about community in HMOs and trying to kind of build that community in, and we do, you know, as well at the roadmap. We talk about things like the floor layouts and the way that furniture is arranged and other amenities.
Yeah.
And I think what you just described then, actually, quite interestingly, didn't really. I think you were talking about the same objective, which was community and people and that shared living experience, but it wasn't about how the property necessarily looked or functioned. It was more about the people, and it was more about the way that you found the house and the way that you decided to live with those individuals,
Yeah.
which it sounds, I'll be honest, almost idealistic right now. And
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's because, I mean, I don't know what your opinion is. Is it because we're going a little bit too far and getting a bit too concerned about spec being almost being the be all and end all? Is it legislation and red tape? Because I would love the idea of letting people inquire about our properties, go and meet the existing tenants, and then kind of decide between themselves, and you know, almost this kind of self-sustaining environment. You know, in our small HMOs and in our bigger properties as well. But the skeptic in me just says now, could it work? You know, would we end up with bad tenants? Would we end up with people falling out? I mean, what do you think, Van? Is this idealistic now in 2022, or is this something that we've overshot and we need to kind of reverse back up and look at solutions to actually making it happen?
Yeah, I think I probably don't have a solid answer on how you make this happen. I think like creating communities is like it's somewhere between a science and an art. And where my landlord was really successful is I never saw him during the moving process. He was like a name that people knew and no one ever met. And like you'd hear like, oh, I think I saw him coming in to change a light bulb, but he didn't live anywhere in the area. So this guy was managing like 150 or 180 units, I think, and come into the city once a week to oversee things. And I think like that, I think, is part of why it worked. He really like relied on the community to handle themselves, and that
So he kind of left you to some extent to your own devices.
yeah. So like he made it very clear that you're moving in. Like we were on a joint tenancy for one thing, so like it was our place. I'd never met these people before, but because I went through this experience of like meeting them and like having a drink with them, then we went to the pub to sort of seal the deal with things. I felt comfortable entering a joint tenancy with these people. We looked after the place. It felt like it was on us to make it all work, and he was basically providing the tools for us to create that community. And he'd occasionally like do prompting things, but for me, like the nudge idea, like the nudge theory, is more important than the actual like doing everything. So we see people that are trying to really do this co-living thing, and it seems like you go in one of two directions. You make properties like absolutely stunning, beautiful, Instagrammable, but you've kind of like, that's the surface thing. It's like finding a really hot person with no personality, and it's like, yeah, you've got me through the door, but then you're like, huh.
I can actually see an app being built of the sorts of Instagram properties we're used to seeing now, where you just swipe left and swipe right, and that's kind of how you decide. I almost feel like that is actually part, and I'm guilty of this, where the mentality behind making sure you get your house full and stuff is going. It's quite funny, but okay, I get you. But so what about things like so actually there's a few things I want to come back to. So I actually want to circle back there on an interesting point you made. You said you guys were on a joint AST and you're professionals. I want to circle back on that. And I also want to circle back on COHO, and I'm just really interested to know how COHO has got to where it has got to, and also what the kind of the near future looks like. But just a quick question on this one then. So in that example, and you're living with these other guys in the house, sort of when it came to maintenance and things like that, did you guys take on the responsibility to do that yourself? Was the house inspected? Was there almost sort of a culture between yourselves to self-manage the house? How did it actually work in practice then, if your landlord wasn't that present?
I think a big part of it is when you're living with people you care about, and by care about, I don't mean like I love them. I mean like I didn't want to come across like a dick to them. So like I had essentially social responsibility. Like I didn't want to wreck the house because they are my peers and they would look down on me. That's something that people care about. We care about fitting in. So because
it's also your house that you'd be wrecking. So.
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't stop some people.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, so I think part of it is just that like we felt that responsibility, like we felt like friends living together, so we did look after it. There was a few little things where I was that tenant that like you probably laugh at and share the message with, where a light bulb went. I genuinely don't know. Do I change the light bulb? Is there a set of light bulbs? Do I go and buy a light bulb? So I did once message a landlord and got a bit of a dick reply from him. but like, yeah, like, if the freezer was completely, when I first moved in, they were like, here's your part of the freezer. You couldn't open the door. It was so iced over. And I just hacked at it with a knife and a chisel and a hammer. And like, I fixed the whole freezer. It wasn't damaged, but it wasn't damaged in the end. But like, yeah, it's that kind of like, something's wrong. First of all, you try and fix it. It's like in your own house, you'll try and fix it. You'll have a go. And then you call the landlord. But I think it was because of, it wasn't that concierge service. It didn't feel like he was a babysitter. It's like, here's the house. I'm going to leave you to try and sort it out. Call me if you actually need something. And I don't believe it was inspected, to be honest. We didn't have a cleaner. What? We could have paid for a cleaner. We once said, can we get a cleaner? And I was like, yeah, I can give you a price for one.
Maybe. I think in part, I've talked about this concierge service before, and I think in part that this is something that's kind of been baked into the industry by the purpose-built student accommodation sector, which is a massive industry, huge. And when we talk about HMOs, actually the student sector is still by far the biggest, and kind of controls and almost dictates kind of what trickles through into the professional sector. That's certainly how it's been so far. But the new PBSA stuff has got better and better and better and better. So for a decade, we've gone from gold standard to, this platinum standard accommodation, like you said, with almost a concierge service. And then the expectations of tenants, who may at the time have been students, has been incredibly high about what they can expect, how quickly they can expect it to be done. If I'm honest, about how they can speak to people from behind keyboards.
Yeah.
And perhaps to a certain degree, this idea of entitlement folds into that. I don't want to brand everyone with the same brush, but that has trickled through, and I think we've had to mobilize quickly to manage these sorts of expectations. And I think that's almost maybe as a knee. I mean, maybe it is a knee jerk. It certainly felt like it was what we needed to do, but improve our standards, start to try and develop our own type of concierge service for ourselves. But um, interestingly, I've got a sort of a big property, it's a 24 bed, and actually it's split into four different flats in there. So there's two 6 beds and two 5 beds, and the whole building in COVID became super tight, really friendly. They're all young professionals, and they have a WhatsApp group for the whole building, and they actually behave very much like what you described, Van.
Yeah.
We didn't we put them in ourselves, but actually what we found more and more and more with everybody in that building is that as a group and as smaller groups within the flats, they want to make sure that they get to meet the new
Yeah.
tenants. And what we're finding is the houses have been super sticky. So we've had tenants who've been in there for ages, tenants who've renewed after a 12-month contract. They clearly really enjoy being there. I go out with some pals, out in Sheffield for some beers and some food, and I'll often see groups of them from that building in there hanging out together as
Yeah.
well. So I can see that community thing that you're talking about, and it's really weird. It happened, I think, because we did to an extent leave them to their own
Hmm.
devices. We didn't completely do that, but in COVID, they were sort of locked in. They had to figure a lot of stuff out for themselves. We weren't going in to inspect. We were saying, look, you're going to have to wait. You're going to have to wait. You're going to have to wait. And they have got really close and really bonded, and actually, in many respects, sort of run the building themselves. And it's one of our easier properties to manage.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of what you just said we've seen in one or two of our buildings, and I have been thinking about this. I have been thinking about whether we need to actually give some responsibility
Hmm.
back to the tenants, particularly the professional tenants. I'm not sure about the student tenants so much, but the professional tenants to manage their own households a little bit more and be less available as a landlord.
Yeah.
Not to shirk on the work that we need to do as a landlord, but almost to make their living experience
Well,
better.
that's what it is. Yeah, I think there's a few things at play really. It's like when this HMO industry started coming up with the early people. It was a kind of like it was a cheaper product. It attracted cheaper, not cheaper. That's the wrong word. It attracted so lower income tenants, and
Yeah.
as a result, the management styles that came with that was more of a kind of it was one way. And now we're seeing this we're far evolved now. Like young people really recognize the importance of like loneliness and mental health and the effect those two have on each other, and like they're starting to want to have connection. Like we're sociable creatures, we want to be in groups, and I think like that's recognized more and more now, but we're still kind of coming out of this mindset of it was an industry that was fully low income, and it still is for probably a big chunk of it. But now we're starting to see demands coming from people who aren't necessarily low income. They're at the start of their life journey, but they can afford
Mm.
somewhere, but they expect very different things. And this hostility, like I don't know what causes it, but like there is a natural landlord tenant hostile kind of relationship, and like all it takes is the tenant kind of coming in with a bit of a sort of like not very nice way of speaking and the landlord responding in kind, and it draws more apart. Whereas like pretty much any other industry, if you run a hotel and someone comes in and like comes in to complain, the person on the desk right away tries to diffuse it and they try to create that
Mm.
relationship. And I think it's a lot harder because the skills that go into being an HMO manager, you're pretty much an investor. You're like doing all of the building, the regulation stuff, and the management. Adding like customer service skills to that isn't a natural fit. So it's but then you're trying to like be a jack of all trades and do that really important bit really well. So I think that would be my guess as to why things are as they've kind of got to be.
I think you've hit the hammer on the nail there, Van, with that, because being a landlord and building a portfolio is very, very difficult. It's so mechanical. There are so many moving parts, and you just highlighted a few of them there. And you're right. A lot of property owners, investors, they are that first and foremost. They're investors. They're property people, not necessarily people
Yeah.
people. And that makes it tricky for some people. And I think the whole digitalization of business really hasn't helped, because things do very much get lost in translation, particularly in emails, and I think even more so in WhatsApp. I did a podcast recently on WhatsApp, which has actually turned out to be one of the most popular episodes we've ever done, because a lot of our listeners obviously manage their houses and tenants on WhatsApp,
I want to say about
and
that.
there are good and bad ways. But it's so easy for things to very quickly spiral, and people get frustrated, and all of a sudden that very important and quite fragile relationship between tenant and landlord is damaged.
And then when you've put in so much hard work, like to get the money together, to even like afford what you're doing, to then do it, and when you're putting it all together, you're picturing this perfect tenant, and you're like, oh, I'm putting this in, and I'll love this here, and I'll love this there, and then someone moves in and acts disrespectful. It's quite easy to then be like, how dare you, to like have that like instant pull back. Like when you think you're doing something good for someone and it feels they've not respected that, it's quite easy for that to become personal. So like having the same person handling all those tasks, like it's difficult. I'm sure you can't do all of them well. So I think it's natural where it's got to. And I think it's just how do we get out of that? And that's kind of essentially an intentional segue. That's essentially where COHO's been born from.
This is a really fascinating conversation. I'm really interested in a lot of this stuff, actually, Van, and I think a lot of this has been whirring around my mind subconsciously. And I think with things, stepping back and just looking at the macro picture of everything at the minute, but particularly, for us as property investors in this particular niche, this industry that we're in, there's a lot of stuff that I'm seeing on the horizon that concerns me. That's really making me think about, what do we need to do to almost reinvent the business, reinvent the whole model, in fact, in part. And I suppose I would summarize a lot of this stuff by maybe challenges we face, or quite possibly, really quite serious threats to the industry now. So
I mean, just to stop you a sec there, I really wouldn't be concerned. As in, I genuinely think we're at this really exciting point where things are about to change. And those who aren't absolutely battered and bruised and wanting to escape from all of this out of COVID, those that are still in it now, that are recognizing that the change is coming, they're at the front of it, and they're going to be leading the pack. So I think, there's challenges. We need to figure things out, but like it's a really exciting time. I think like just look, like the investment we've had in COHO is kind of based around the belief that this industry is changing and professionalizing, and those who are in there at the front are really going to rise.
So I can see the very best that could be ahead of us, and also the very worst. And as a business owner, and I suppose our business is very mechanical. A lot of our community members very mechanical. They own those properties. So I guess that the really good stuff looks like there is definitely a shift and a more accepting attitude towards living in shared homes. I don't think it's mainstream everywhere yet, but I think it's definitely that's definitely the direction of travel. I also think that standards of accommodation and standards of management and some of the red tape that's been put in place is really helping improve the private rental sector. And I think access to lending and the comfort that lenders now have in HMOs as an asset class is definitely there. And that gives us a lot of confidence. But at the same time, some of the big concerns for me are, I think the very biggest one I see at the minute is the council tax threat to professional HMOs. And this conversation has been happening actually for a few years. It's picking up pace as more people are being affected by it. This is one of the big threats that I see. Utilities is a big one as well, and managing these and making sure that the model stays profitable. It's got to be profitable for landlords and business owners. So what's your answer to that sort of stuff then, Van? Council tax, this idea of banding by the room, affecting professional landlords, which would affect a lot of your customers at COHO, a lot of our community members. What does a solution look like there? Is there a solution? Is this a pivot scenario? Is this something to end the idea of professional HMOs? I certainly hope not, but it's a big problem.
So I mean, I think both bills and council tax, from a risk perspective, come into the same thing. It's due to most people at the moment doing all-inclusive bills. So I mean, we can talk about that in a minute, but like that aside, it's to me it seems like a bit of a stealth tax against poor people. It's kind of like HMOs are mostly on the lower income side at the moment. And this isn't a hit to the landlord. It may feel like it because it's bills all inclusive, but all that money is just going to get passed on to tenants. Eventually, like if that becomes a standard, it just makes rent more expensive. So I see it as like it's not fundamentally changing things, but it is closing the gap between, do you live in a single let or do you live in a shared house? And if the shared house is purely an economic decision, that gap gets closer and closer, then you'll live in a single let. Like if you're being subjected to your housemates, you'll choose a single let at a certain price point. But if you're living there as part of as a choice, as you want to live with others, then that's not as much of an issue. So I think like part of it, going back to the actual problem with council tax, I don't know if there's a silver bullet, but I think joint tenancy is something that needs to be explored a lot more. I know at the moment it's like considered only really for students, joint tenancies, but there isn't a reason it can't be used for professionals.
I posted about this very point this morning in the community, in the HMO community, and actually it's already become quite an interesting conversation. And I posed the hypothetical question, is there an alternative to bills inclusive? We're certainly thinking and have actually already made steps towards potentially going back to that in the student market, which is a bit easier with the joint ASTs. With the professional market, I've said exactly that. I think there are some problems. I think there's a lot of risk being carried by offering an all-inclusive package, and I think what we can charge for rent or the increases we can make to rent is definitely going to lag quite substantially behind the rise in the cost of bills. So I pose a question, what do you guys, what do people in our community think? Is there an alternative? And I would say by far the majority so far that have said it's impractical to do it any other way. And I have to admit, when I look at it, I do struggle to find a practical solution. But I am also mindful that we might well need to find an alternative solution. Like this might actually have to happen to continue to make it work as well as it does. So, you think bills inclusive? And this is interesting actually, because particularly from you, who is very aware of what needs to happen at the back end to manage this stuff, which I think is in part of the anxiety of landlords like me and our community members. So you think, Van, that actually there is a solution to manage professional tenants on joint ASTs?
Yeah, well, just to the bills inclusive thing, I've said for probably 2 years that people shouldn't be doing bills inclusive, that people have often disguised it, or maybe they genuinely believe it, I don't know, that like that's what tenants want. Well, yeah, that's what they want, but they're not going into an HMO because it's got bills inclusive. It's just like a nice benefit, and often people don't quite understand the value of that. Like if you say that comes free, you value that to an extent, but you probably don't value it to the full amount. So I've said for like sort of 2 years that it shouldn't be bills inclusive. It should be X rent plus an estimated Y bills. And the real difficulty is it's easy for me to say that, but it's genuinely really difficult to execute that. And I think that's the true reason, because you can't make money on bills. If you're charging bills, you can't make any money on it, and that's a massive admin burden. And I also think in HMOs it's a bad idea to actually put the bills to the tenants. So I don't believe that, like for students, they're there for a year, you can get them to sign up for gas and electrics, it's worth it for a bit of pain to handle it. Whereas when you've got people moving in and out every month, that is just impractical. So to me, the solution is landlord manages the bills and passes on the bills at cost on a prorated way, so no money's actually made on it. But then the risk is all bared by the tenants for excessive use. And you can do that. You can scale it to like this person works from home, they've got a slight supplement on it and stuff. But yeah, the admin side of it is close to impossible. I've seen people do it, and I think they are glad they do it that way. But it's difficult. And something that we're working on at the moment is that ability to be able to say, this is the rent, here's an estimate of the bills, but we'll include the bills based on the actual amount that's charged each month, and then at the end of your tenancy it's going to be reconciled along with everything else that's owed. Maybe you get a bit of a refund, maybe you have to pay a bit more to cover it, or maybe you have to write that off if they're not going to But to me, that's the proper solution, because you'd never get a single let where someone says bills inclusive. And if you're going to use the same
No.
justification of, well, that's what people want, why aren't they doing it on single lets? Like, people want it, but you can't bear that risk as a business, especially when things come in like the electrics off. I've literally turned into my dad this week. Like, the heating's off. If I see the kids go near it, I'm throwing shoes at them. Doors are all closed, jumpers are on. Like, no one predicted that a year ago. So for people who have put that into their tenancy agreements, that they've basically just lost a room of the house. Council tax, no one was predicting, say 3 or 4 years ago, that they were going to start being so aggressive and put this increase of tax on. And I think any area of your business that you're putting yourself open to that level of risk is a mistake. So yeah, I think that we should be moving away from bills inclusive. And I think when we have a solution in place, I think it will help. But I think otherwise, even if you're not a COHO user, you should kind of be looking at, is it worth adding to your admin headache each month, pulling in the bills, dividing it and handling it? And then, sorry, you were talking about the joint tenancies. From that perspective, so I really think that joint tenancies are possible. Again, it's an admin headache, because when someone moves out, you need to get sort of 5-6 people to all sign a new tenancy agreement. And I know people will make the argument of tenants won't do it, they don't want to take the liability. But you can have like limited liability ones where it's like you're only liable for X amount of rent, and maybe a damage that is being proven to be you. So I think that's not massively an issue. I really think we should be looking at joint tenancies. And my reason for it wasn't around how do we save ourselves money. It was around that kind of social responsibility piece. Like, if they're on a single AST, they have a room and they have access to shared living space. And you, as Andy Graham, you can just go in and sit on the sofa and watch TV if you're in the area, and they could come in, you can be like, oh yeah. It's like it's your place that they have a room in. And that's a very different relationship to it's their place. And to me, it's that kind of that ownership piece, that kind of side of things that I think joint tenancies will start to change the mindset of people. It's your house, you look after it. So yeah, I put ticks in the joint tenancy on a number of reasons, and I think the only thing acting against it is the tech, the processes to do it.
It's definitely an interesting conversation. I think it definitely is something that we all need to be mindful of. We clearly don't have the solutions to this yet, but it's good to know that people like you are thinking about how this can actually be managed at the back end as well, Van. I think there's a practical element, with our tenants and customers, and I think there's a very sort of real element as to how do we physically manage this, and the admin that goes along with it, which I guess is another nice segue into what COHO is doing, and perhaps the importance now of managing properties, particularly HMOs, in the right way, so you can be as profitable and as efficient as possible. Because this, for me, has been, for a long, long time, the big piece that I think landlords haven't given enough attention to. I think the idea of buying something, renting it out, making money, the property goes up in value, has just overshadowed actually what's really involved. And I think if you do it well, it doesn't have to be a huge burden. And systems like the ones that you're developing are absolutely key and are going to be increasingly important moving forward. So can you tell us a bit about what you're currently doing, Van, and how landlords, should really be using systems and software like the stuff that you're creating to improve their portfolios?
Yeah, so I mean, just going back to the reason and why I'm doing this, like, I really want to make it so my children have a shared house, or have the option to have a shared house. And when I was sort of coming up with this, what needs to happen for that, I was looking at like the state of the industry at the moment, and a lot of HMO managers, they're so busy with running like the actual management, the execution, the operation, like they don't have time to improve the service. They don't have time to to put all those things in place that would attract the modern tenants, the ones that aren't looking for it as a price factor. And the reason for that, in my mind, is the tech just wasn't there. So like, I'm quite good at tech. That's kind of my strength. which is funny because I'm quite anti-tech. But anyway, so what I saw is that we've got a load of property management software, and they're all built for single lets because that's the thing that everyone cares about. That's what you see as like however many million properties. No one seemed to care about HMOs, which is like the really hard bit to do. So it's like we've built something that's designed for something kind of easy to an extent. I'm not going to play down what single let people do, but as in like single let compared to HMO is like 6 beds is like 6 times the effort of one single let. Yet the people who make the software is looking at it as like, well, that's one HMO. Whereas we look at that and go, that's like 6 single lets. So yeah, building software around the easy part and trying to adapt it to the hard part is less than ideal if you're trying to come up with a proper solution. So what we kind of recognized was that the people were using like, okay, software that maybe wasn't quite suitable. I won't name names. I won't name names. I was gonna just be a dick and start naming names. No, I won't name names, but software that's not always suitable. But then also like a massive artillery of all these other little bits of kit that are all pretty cool on their own. Like they work quite well, but they don't hang together. They're not like talking to each other well.
Well, we've found over the years, and I've been doing this for well over a decade, that it's all clunky. Nothing really quite does what we need it to do, and it never has. There've been systems that have done bits of it. There've been add-ons, but before you know it, you're building systems on top of systems on top of systems. Then updates happen, and then you change an internal process, and the whole thing falls down. And as you build a portfolio, even a small portfolio, that is actually a big problem. So, I think you guys looking at the whole picture and actually looking at it from the perspective of a landlord who actually rents out a property by the room is probably something that hasn't really been done properly ever. And it seems obvious. It seems obvious when we talk about it like this that there is a gap here, and that somebody needs to step in and do this. And it's great to know that you guys. And actually, this is one of the reasons why we obviously have a partnership between COHO and the HMO roadmap. And one of the reasons I was really excited and keen to do that was because, in part, what the values and the vision that you shared, Vann, and the guys at COHO, but also how serious you were taking this. This isn't something that you were just kind of bolting together in your bedroom. This is a very serious venture. You've been building this business for a while, probably a bit longer than people are aware of, and actually you've done some pretty serious rounds of funding, haven't you?
This business would be very, very difficult to do had we not have made money from our last 2 startups. Like, it's the reason why people build a little bit of the system. Like, I believe that Good Lord went in with the intention to build the whole thing. They built out the onboarding well and kind of stopped there because that's a big job. We're trying to build out all of these things into COHO, bringing like the best in class in where it's available, but often it's just not available. There's just not things that hang together well. And like you asked at the start if I have any properties that I've invested in. Me and my co-founder were looking to buy maybe 3-4 HMOs at the start of this just to sort of test while we're building it. And we're just advised by people, you'll become landlords. and what we tried to build with COHO is software that someone, it does it for you, essentially. For the 95% of times it goes right, it does it for you. Like, that's our vision. It's that when someone moves in, you go through an onboarding process. Like, it even starts before that. It posts your listings, it brings the leads in, it goes through the onboarding. Everything's already in. They already have the place to add the maintenance and see the bills. The bills get reconciled. When they move out, it just automatically lists the property. Like, we really want that seamless. That's our vision. It does everything from start to finish, but it is a beast to build. Like, that is a big investment, and tech's not cheap. But thankfully we've got those skills in our team, and we had some nice money to start with. But yeah, we raised over $250,000 a few months ago. We're looking to do more than that again in a couple of months. We have big backing to achieve this because people recognize the need for it. Like, in our first rounds, a lot of the investors are our customers. That, to me, that's something that was really nice, really warming to the team. But yeah, I think there's just a huge gap because people realize that if tech can take away a lot of the pain, which it absolutely can, it can't take away all of it. at all, but it can take away a lot of the like repetitive things. Then people can just scale faster. If you lose if you gain 80% of your time, you can just increase your portfolio by that amount and still have the same amount of time, essentially. And like with my desire to make that reality of shared living being common, what we had to do was build tools that give landlords time back to work on their business, to either make more properties or to make better properties.
Van, it all sounds so interesting. It is really great to know that there are people taking this really seriously and solving a problem. And I've been out there and raised large sums of money, to build some of my businesses, and I understand not only how tough and challenging that can be, but also how important that is, and the sort of commitment that's required to do that. So it's quite exciting, and really exciting for me as well, who's sort of not necessarily building the tech myself, but has been using this sort of tech for years and years, knowing that you guys are really spearheading making this better and solving the problems that we've been feeling for so long. What can we expect from COHO? Have you got any updates or any plans for improvement or expansion in the next year or so that we can keep an eye out for?
Yeah, so I think the next big thing we're looking to launch is bringing all of the finances in, so you can get a very clear view of everything that's happening. All the rent will automatically reconcile, and even do the credit control up to a certain point. We really want to build that in, and as part of that, it will allow you down the line to split those bills between people and stop doing it all inclusive and make that easy. I think over time we're just going to be adding more and more. So when you have 10 bits of software, then you'll have 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. And then in the end, you're like, I'm just using COHO.
Yeah.
And that's not us building everything. That's us finding who the best people are and hooking in with them actually properly, like deep into the system.
You know what? I don't think I've told you this, Van, but a number of my mentees and kind of masterminders use COHO to manage their properties. Some of them got smaller portfolios and just kind of still learning the way. And experiencing some of the pain points for the first time, and using systems to help manage their portfolios, and the feedback about COHO. And I think most importantly, because I know how important this is to us and has been over the years, because we understand that this is a process of evolution. The products like COHO aren't built overnight. They take time, and they improve with the feedback from customers as well. But the feedback that I've been hearing from the guys that I'm working with who are using COHO a lot is that your customer service is fantastic. So when there's something they don't quite get, or maybe something that doesn't seem to be working properly, or something they want to learn maybe for the first time, you guys are brilliant at making sure that service is there. And I think that is so as important as the tech itself, and it's really great to hear that that's the sort of culture that you guys have got on at COHO as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have this kind of old school view of reputation's really important, and actually just doing something good. Like, it's not about the money. It's partly about the money. Obviously, it has to be a business, but like, I'd rather not make money than make money in a way that's abusive or people aren't enjoying using it. I want COHO to be considered a nice thing to use, and so we take the feedback of our customers really seriously, and we've basically built it around what they want to see. But the people who said that there's anything wrong with it, they've lied, clearly. There's never been a bug.
Van, honestly, it's been a really fascinating conversation, and I'm sure you and I could chat about this stuff for a long, long time. And I'm actually really, really excited to see what you guys do, and really excited to be a very small part of COHO and kind of helping you grow, and the partnership that we've got is great. And I think we're going to continue to recommend our listeners and community to COHO. And for any of our members of the HMO Roadmap listening today who haven't already checked it out, there is a completely exclusive discount to the annual membership with COHO inside the HMO Roadmap. And COHO have only done that for us, and we've only done that with them because of everything Van has talked about today. So Van, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a fascinating conversation. I'm really looking forward to actually maybe circling back in 12 months' time to see where things are at, and where things are at in the industry, and where things are at with COHO. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much too. And genuinely, it's people like you and the training you give and the help you give that are really helping professionalize the industry. So thank you on behalf of all the future tenants.
Thanks, Ben.